Hi, it's fall and it's time to look at our compost pile. Now there isn't much time left, so we are going to do a cold compost pile instead of a hot one. What's the difference? A cold compost pile, inside the temperature is not really going to be any different or much different than the outside temperature. And that's okay. It's very difficult to get your compost pile to be hot enough to kill everything. So what we're going to do is we're not going to worry about that. One way to start out is we're not going to put any weeds, seeds, or disease in our compost pile, just to be safe. When you create a compost pile, you use whatever you have. In my case, I have a lot of leaves and a lot of grass. So as I was cleaning up leaves as they were falling and I was mowing the final grass for the season, I was chopping them both up with my lawnmower and putting them together. And the reason why I do that is because your compost, you want a mix of greens and browns. Greens have nitrogen, the browns have carbon, and you also have other nutrients and minerals mixed in there. As long as you don't go crazy with the green, you should be okay. So for example, you don't want to create a large pile of solid green grass, because then that will turn anaerobic. It won't have enough oxygen. It'll start smelling and it'll turn into mush. So having a healthy amount of brown mixed in with the green is going to keep it aerobic, has enough oxygen in it, and it'll break down better. It should smell like forest or leaves. It shouldn't have a bad odor to it. If it does have a bad odor to it, that means you need to add more brown in it. So let's go through the different things you can put into your compost pile. Like I mentioned, leaves. Now leaves by themselves can take 2 or more years to break down if you had a large pile. So what we do is we run over them with our lawnmower several times to start getting them into smaller pieces. Now that could cut down the compost time in half or more. So just to kind of get it started. We also put in grass. If you have too much green grass, then what you can do is, if you have extra space, lay that out flat on the ground and let it turn brown. You can then re-add that brown grass into your pile later without it going anaerobic on you. Some other things you can add are coffee grinds. In my case, if I went through a tin or two of coffee grinds over the winter, I could sprinkle them on there and I have no problem with that. Food scraps. Now in my compost pile, I don't put any food scraps in it, simply because I have enough materials not to, and also be mindful of your neighbors, and you don't want to cause a smell. If you put in too many food scraps and it's got a bad odor to it, then you need to put in more brown layers usually. If you're going to put in vegetables in it, cover them when you're done with leaves or something else, so that you shouldn't be able to smell it standing there. In my case, I don't even add them at all, and I don't have that problem. The end result is your compost pile should smell nice, like a forest or a nice earthy smell to it. So you can also add in cardboard if you're breaking up small hand-sized pieces. Now, unless you're saving your cardboard for your lasagna garden like we did in our last episode, you can then break it up into small pieces and use that as your brown layer. If you have wood chips, you can add them, but here's a key difference. If you're going to put your compost on top of the soil and not mix it in, then it's okay to add wood chips. If you're going to be mixing your compost into your soil, then don't add wood chips. Because if they're not broken down yet, when they're in the soil and they start decomposing there, they're going to be robbing your plants of nitrogen while they're doing that. So that's the key thing, is don't put wood chips in your compost unless it's going to be acting as a mulch layer. So what I do is, just to be safe, is if I have a pile of wood chips, I'll just keep them separate and let them break down on their own. And then in the spring, I can decide how to use them. I have the choice at that point. In my garden, I'm actually using almost all of my compost as a mulch, because I don't think I'm going to be able to get it all broken down by the spring. That's like the safest way to do compost, because then whether it's 10% broken down or 50% or 80%, it's all going to be good, because our number one thing is we want to block out weeds. And so having enough mulch to cover your soil with 4 or 5 inches of material, that's my main goal. So I don't care if my compost is fully broken down or not. It's going to be totally on top of the soil. And I think that's one of the easiest compost piles to start. If you want to get it all the way broken down, it's going to take a little bit longer, or you may have to look into a hot compost. So some other things you can add are wood ash. I have a wood stove, so during the winter I'm going to have to clean out the ash. So instead of buying lime and sprinkling it over my garden in the fall, I can just use wood ash and sprinkle that over the garden, or I can add a bucket into my compost piles. And the wood ash, what's that going to do is usually it will add potassium. It's more on the alkaline side, where leaves can be more on the acidic side. So if I add those both, they'll balance out each other. So with compost, if we're around a pH of 7, give or take a little bit, that's fine. Another thing that people are considering adding to their compost piles is biochar or charcoal. I would say the key to think about with biochar is think of it as like mini sponges. You don't want to put raw biochar into your soil directly, because think of it as a filter. Like that's why we have them on water filters. They absorb all the nutrients. We don't want to put that directly in the soil where they're going to be doing that at the same time the plants want the nutrients. So what we want to do is put the charcoal in our compost as early as possible. That way it has time to soak up as many of those nutrients as possible. And then when we put it into the garden in the spring, we're going to have more nutrients available to the soil. So one of the things I get asked is like, what size should I make my compost pile? Since ours is a cold compost pile, we don't care about the size. If you're looking to get a warm or hot compost pile, you want to have at least a 3-foot by 3-foot pile. Since we're doing a cold compost pile, the size really doesn't matter. Just keep adding your materials to it. Now, if you're making a compost pile that you want to be fully broken down by the time you use it in your garden, then you have to think of it as in terms of batches. So you're going to get all your ingredients all piled up in a short amount of time, and then you want them all to compost or decompose together. In that situation, you don't want to keep adding more and more and more ingredients, because when the older ones are done, you're going to have new ones in there that are just starting. Now, with a cold compost pile where we're not really concerned about breaking down and we're just going to be using it as a mulch, I would say you can keep adding to it. Like in this case here, I've got mostly grass and leaves. So I can just keep adding more and more to it, and I'm not too worried about it. Hey, it's great if at the bottom in the spring I've got some finished compost, but for the most part, I just want to make sure I have enough material for mulch and blocking out weeds that I can decompose over time. So there you go. Just take whatever you have, start a pile, get it going. Any compost is better than none. If you have some finished compost by the spring, great, your plants will love it. If you don't, and it's not decomposed at all, then you can still use it as a mulch. And that's what I do. No matter what, your compost can help your garden. So try it out. Remember to enjoy your time outside with God in your garden. God bless.